My name is James Carter, and the day my company celebrated my 40 years of service was also the day I realized my only son had stopped seeing me as his father. The ballroom lights dimmed as the MC stepped toward the podium, smiling at the hundreds of employees, executives, and guests gathered inside the downtown Columbus Convention Center. "Ladies and gentlemen," she announced, "today we honor a man whose integrity has shaped this company for 4 decades." The giant screens behind her filled with photographs from another lifetime. There I was in 1986, wearing an oversized hard hat. Another photo showed me standing beside co-workers whose faces were now gone from this world. Then came pictures from company picnics, volunteer events, charity fundraisers, and retirement parties, where I had stood applauding everyone else. Today, it was finally my turn. The applause echoed through the ballroom. I smiled politely, but my eyes kept drifting toward the front row. One chair remained empty. It carried a small white card, reserved for Ryan Carter, my son. The camera followed my gaze. The audience followed the camera. Even before anyone said a word, everyone understood. The seat was supposed to belong to my family. Instead, it belonged to silence. The MC noticed. She walked closer with a gentle smile. "Mr. Carter," she asked, "would you like us to wait a few more minutes?" I shook my head. "No." She hesitated. "Would you like someone else to sit beside you?" I looked across the ballroom. Near the back stood a nervous young man wearing a navy blue suit that clearly wasn't expensive, but had been carefully pressed. His hands were folded in front of him. He looked like he wasn't sure he belonged there. I smiled. "Daniel." His eyes widened. "My late best friend's son." The audience turned toward him. "Would you come sit with me?" Daniel looked almost frightened. "Me?" I nodded. "Your father would have been sitting there if he were still alive." The room became quiet. Daniel slowly walked down the aisle. He sat beside me. I patted his shoulder. "Thanks for coming." His voice barely escaped. I wouldn't have missed this. 5 minutes later, the CEO returned to the microphone. He smiled at me, then looked toward Daniel. "There is one final surprise." I frowned. I hadn't been told about any surprise. The CEO continued. "Years ago, James Carter quietly turned down several executive bonuses and asked instead that the company create a legacy fund honoring loyalty, sacrifice, and service to others." Murmurs spread across the ballroom. "Today," the CEO said, "that fund officially begins." He paused. "The first recipient was personally selected by James." Daniel looked confused. "So today," the CEO smiled warmly, "Daniel Brooks will receive an $800,000 legacy gift." The ballroom exploded. People stood. Some cheered, others cried. Daniel froze. I think there's been a mistake." The CEO laughed softly. "There hasn't." Daniel covered his face. I simply squeezed his shoulder. "You earned this." 3 hours later, I sat alone in my pickup truck outside my small ranch house. My phone buzzed again, and again, and again. When I finally looked, 112 missed calls. Most were from Ryan. The rest, his wife Ashley, unknown numbers, old relatives, even reporters. I stared at the screen for several long seconds. Then, I placed the phone face down on the passenger seat, because the story everyone had just witnessed on television had actually begun years earlier. Until 6 years ago, I never imagined my family would drift apart. My wife Linda and I had built a simple life. Nothing glamorous, nothing people would envy online. Just honest work, cookouts in the backyard, camping trips every summer, Friday night pizza, church on Sunday mornings. Ryan grew up in that little brick house believing we weren't wealthy. The truth was, his mother and I simply believed money should buy security, not attention. Linda passed away after a short battle with pancreatic cancer. Ryan was 31 then, already married, already building his own life. Her death changed something inside both of us. For me, it created silence. For Ryan, it created distance. At first, I told myself that was normal. People get busy, jobs become demanding, marriages require attention, life moves forward. I understood that. I truly did. I never expected weekly visits. I didn't expect holiday dinners every month. I only hoped we'd still be father and son. Instead, our conversations slowly became appointments. Dad, can I call you later? Dad, we're busy this weekend. Dad, maybe next month. Months became seasons. Seasons became years. Whenever Ryan did visit, Ashley always seemed eager to leave. She wasn't rude, not openly. She simply acted as though spending time with me was another obligation squeezed between vacations, brunches, and social events. I never blamed her entirely. Marriage changes priorities, but somewhere along the way, my son stopped making decisions for himself. If Ashley wanted something, that became Ryan's opinion too. I noticed it in little things. He stopped fishing with me, stopped coming over to watch football, stopped asking for my advice. Even birthdays became text messages. Still, I never complained. Parents don't keep score. At least good parents don't. Then about 3 months before my retirement ceremony, our company announced something completely unexpected. The board wanted to celebrate employees with 40 years of continuous service. Only 2 people qualified. One had retired quietly overseas. That left me. The communications department wanted interviews, old photographs, television coverage. Our local news station planned to broadcast portions of the ceremony live because the company had become one of Ohio's largest employers. Honestly, I would have been perfectly happy with a handshake and a sheet cake in the break room, but the CEO insisted. "You've spent 40 years taking care of this company," he told me. "Now let us take care of you." A week later, I drove to Ryan's house. He answered wearing golf clothes. Ashley was loading suitcases into their SUV. "You heading somewhere?" I asked. "Weekend in Tennessee?" Ryan smiled. "Before you go," I handed him the invitation. He opened it. His eyes widened. "They're televising this, apparently." He laughed. "That's pretty cool, Dad. I'd really like you there." He looked at Ashley, then back at me. "Of course I'll be there." He hugged me. I wouldn't miss it. I believed him, every word, because no matter how old your child becomes, part of you always believes the promises they make. I had no idea that only 24 hours before the ceremony, my phone would ring, Ryan's name would appear, and one simple conversation would change everything. Ryan's name stayed on my phone screen for several seconds before I answered. I already knew something was wrong, or maybe I should say, something had finally become obvious. "Hey, Dad." His voice sounded cheerful, too cheerful. "Everything okay?" I asked. "Yeah, listen, Ashley found this incredible last-minute deal." I didn't answer. "It's this luxury resort in Scottsdale," he continued. "5-star place. We leave tomorrow morning." Tomorrow morning, the morning of my ceremony. I leaned against my kitchen counter and looked out the window. The maple tree Linda and I had planted 25 years earlier swayed gently in the evening breeze. "I thought your ceremony started in the afternoon," Ryan said quickly. "But we'd already booked the flights." "You haven't booked them yet," I replied quietly. There was a long pause. "No. So you could still come." Another silence. Then I heard Ashley's voice in the background. "Babe, tell him they'll understand." Ryan lowered his voice. "Dad, we've both been working so hard. Ashley really needs this vacation." I smiled, though no one could see it. "I understand." "You do?" "Yes. We'll celebrate next week. I'll take you out somewhere nice." "That sounds fine." "You aren't upset?" "No." "Really?" "I'm 70 years old, Ryan." He laughed nervously. "I guess you've learned not to sweat the small stuff." If only he knew. We said goodbye. The house became quiet again. I stood there holding the phone long after the call had ended. Linda used to tell me something whenever Ryan disappointed us as a teenager. "Don't react while you're hurting. Wait until you're thinking clearly." She was always wiser than I was, so I didn't call Ryan back. I didn't send a guilt-filled text. I didn't tell him how much his absence would hurt. Instead, I opened my contacts and scrolled to another name, Daniel Brooks. Daniel answered after the second ring. "Mr. Carter, I hope I'm not interrupting dinner." "Not at all. I have a favor to ask." "Anything." There wasn't even a second of hesitation. That alone made my throat tighten. My company's holding a ceremony tomorrow. I remember you mentioning that. My son won't be coming. Daniel became quiet. I'm sorry. I'd like someone sitting beside me. Another pause. Then he said softly, You want me there? I do. I'd be honored. No questions, no excuses, no checking his calendar, no asking what was in it for him. Just, I'd be honored. I smiled for the first time that evening. Your father would have been proud of you. His voice cracked. I hope so. I first met Daniel almost 30 years earlier. Back then, he was just a skinny little boy racing bicycles down our neighborhood sidewalk, while his father, Michael Brooks, grilled hamburgers in the backyard. Michael wasn't just my coworker. He was my brother in every way except blood. We started at Franklin Industrial Systems only 6 months apart. Same factory floor, same impossible supervisors, same mandatory overtime. We bought our first homes within a year of each other. Our wives became best friends. Our sons grew up playing catch together. Some of my happiest memories involve Michael laughing so hard he couldn't finish telling a joke. He had this deep laugh that made everyone else laugh too. The kind of man who never walked into a room without making it brighter. Then came the explosion. It happened during a maintenance shutdown. A faulty pressure valve, wrong place, wrong moment. Everything happened in seconds. Metal screamed. Steam filled the room. I couldn't see. Something heavy crashed beside me, then another. I remember falling. I remember thinking, this is it. But Michael didn't run toward the exit. He ran toward me. He dragged me across the concrete floor while alarms echoed through the building. Later, the doctors told me another 30 seconds inside, that room would have killed me. Michael never spoke about it afterward. Whenever someone called him a hero, he'd shrug. You'd have done the same. Maybe I would have. Maybe I wouldn't. I'll never know, because he never gave me the chance. Years later, cancer did what that explosion couldn't. Watching Michael disappear one hospital visit at a time remains one of the hardest things I've ever lived through. The night before he died, he asked everyone else to leave the room. Only the two of us remained. He reached for my hand. Look after my boy. I nodded. You won't have to ask twice. He smiled. I knew that. Those were the last words he ever spoke to me. Daniel was 19 then, too young to lose his father, too proud to ask anyone for help. He worked evenings stocking shelves at a grocery store, attended community college during the day, delivered pizzas on weekends. Every time I offered money, he politely refused. I'll figure it out. So instead, I found different ways to help. When his old pickup finally died, I connected him with a retired mechanic who rebuilt engines for almost nothing. When he transferred to Ohio State's engineering program, I introduced him to friends who helped him find affordable housing. When he graduated, I was sitting in the audience, not because anyone expected me to, because I'd promised his father. Life, however, had other plans. Daniel discovered he enjoyed mentoring teenagers more than engineering. He became a public school robotics teacher. Some people thought he was wasting his education. I disagreed. Every Christmas, he mailed me a handwritten card. Every birthday, he called. Whenever my gutters needed cleaning or my furnace acted up, Daniel somehow found out before I asked. He'd simply show up carrying a toolbox. Figured you could use another set of hands. That's the kind of man he became. Not because anyone rewarded him, because that's who Michael had raised. The next morning, I arrived at the convention center early. Daniel was already standing outside. He wore a navy suit that had obviously seen several weddings and funerals, yet he stood straighter than many executives walking through those doors. You clean up pretty well, I teased. He laughed. It's the only suit I own. It looks perfect. He handed me a small gift bag. You didn't have to buy me anything. It's not much. Inside sat a simple leather-bound journal. The first page carried one handwritten sentence. Some men earn promotions. Others earn respect. You taught me the difference. For several seconds, I couldn't speak. Finally, I looked up. Your father would be proud. Daniel smiled. I've spent 20 years hoping you'd say that. Before we walked inside, my phone vibrated. Ryan had posted a new photo online. He and Ashley stood beside a sparkling resort pool, Both wore oversized sunglasses, cocktails in their hands. The caption read, "Finally taking the vacation we deserve. Life is too short. Thousands of miles away." They were smiling. I quietly locked my phone, then turned toward Daniel. "Ready?" He nodded, "As ready as I'll ever be." Neither of us knew that within the next 2 hours, the entire country watching that broadcast would witness a surprise none of us had expected. The ballroom looked even larger once every seat had been filled. More than 400 people had gathered that afternoon. Executives, factory workers, office staff, retired employees, community leaders, several local reporters. 2 television cameras rolled quietly near the stage while technicians whispered through headsets. Everything felt polished, professional, far more elaborate than anything I ever expected. Daniel and I sat together in the front row. He kept glancing around as if he were afraid someone would realize he didn't belong there. I leaned toward him. "Relax. I'm trying. You look like you're about to take a final exam." He laughed. "I've spoken in front of classrooms full of teenagers. Somehow this is scarier." "Trust me," I said. "Teenagers are tougher." That finally made him smile. A few seats away sat members of our executive board. Most of them had worked with me for decades. Several gave me little nods. Others walked over to shake my hand. One by one, they thanked me for years of service. But every few minutes, someone's eyes drifted toward the empty chair that had originally been reserved for Ryan. Nobody asked where he was. Nobody had to. The empty seat spoke loudly enough. At exactly 2 o'clock, the lights dimmed. The audience quieted. A video began playing across 3 enormous screens. There I was, 27 years old, hair so thick I barely recognized myself, standing beside the first production line I'd ever supervised. Another photograph appeared, Linda and I at the company Christmas party in 1991. She wore a red dress she'd bought on clearance because we were saving every dollar for Ryan's future college fund. I smiled at the memory. She'd looked beautiful. The next picture showed Ryan himself, 7 years old, wearing an oversized hard hat during family day. He'd insisted he wanted to work with Dad someday. My chest tightened. Funny how life changes. The audience applauded as each decade passed across the screen. 40 years. It looked so simple when compressed into a 5-minute slideshow. Only I knew how many missed weekends, how many overnight shifts, how many birthdays celebrated late, how many sacrifices had quietly filled the spaces between those photographs. The MC stepped back onto the stage. "James Carter has become more than an employee." She smiled warmly. "He became the standard the rest of us tried to follow." More applause. Then she invited our CEO, Richard Holloway, to the podium. Richard wasn't a flashy businessman. He'd started sweeping warehouse floors while attending college. Eventually, he became president of the company. One reason we'd always respected each other was because neither of us ever forgot where we'd started. He adjusted the microphone. "I've spent 31 years working beside James." He looked toward me. "In all those years, I've never once questioned whether he'd do the right thing." He paused. "Sometimes the right thing cost him promotions." The audience looked surprised. Richard continued. "He turned down executive opportunities because they would have required moving his family across the country." I smiled. That was true. Linda never wanted to leave Ohio, neither did Ryan, so neither did I. Richard nodded toward the audience. He also refused performance bonuses on multiple occasions. Now I frowned slightly. We hadn't discussed that. He wasn't supposed to mention it. Richard smiled as though reading my thoughts. "I know James hates attention." Laughter rippled through the ballroom. But today isn't about what makes him comfortable. It's about telling the truth. One executive after another shared stories. A maintenance supervisor described how I'd stayed overnight during a blizzard because several younger employees couldn't safely drive home. A receptionist told everyone how I'd secretly paid for her husband's medical equipment after his stroke. I hadn't expected those stories either. Honestly, I'd forgotten some of them myself. Because when you help someone, you usually don't keep records. You simply move on. Then Richard invited me onto the stage. The applause lasted nearly a full minute. Standing under those bright lights felt strangely uncomfortable. I would have preferred fixing machinery, or organizing inventory. Anything except becoming the center of attention. Richard handed me the Lifetime Legacy Award, a heavy crystal sculpture engraved with my name. 40 years. It suddenly felt real. He shook my hand. You earned every day of it. Then the MC returned. James, she smiled. We noticed someone sitting beside you today. The giant screen displayed Daniel. His eyes grew wide. The audience applauded politely. Would you tell us about him? I looked toward Daniel. He looked like he wanted the floor to open beneath him. I stepped closer to the microphone. His name is Daniel Brooks. My best friend Michael Brooks worked beside me for almost 30 years. Several retired employees immediately smiled. Many remembered Michael. He saved my life during an explosion at our old plant. The ballroom became silent. I continued quietly. When cancer took him, Daniel was only 19. I glanced toward him. His father asked me for one thing before he died. My voice caught. He asked me to look after his son. Daniel lowered his head. I never replaced his father. I couldn't. But I've watched him become the kind of man every father hopes to raise. The audience applauded. Daniel wiped his eyes. Then I added one final sentence. If anyone deserved to sit in my son's seat today, I smiled at him. It was Daniel. The room stood. Another standing ovation. Longer this time. Stronger. More emotional. I saw people wiping tears, including several executives. Just when I believed the ceremony had reached its end, Richard stepped back toward the microphone. Actually, he smiled. We have one final surprise. I looked at him confused. This hadn't been rehearsed. Richard reached into a folder. About 12 years ago, James Carter approached the board with an unusual request. He looked around the ballroom. Instead of accepting future executive retention bonuses, he asked us to invest those funds into something that would outlive him. The audience leaned forward. He called it the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Richard smiled. His exact words were, he opened the folder and read from a letter I'd completely forgotten writing years earlier. Money disappears. Character doesn't. Help one good person, and they'll spend a lifetime helping others. The room became perfectly still. Richard folded the letter. For years, this fund quietly grew. Additional company contributions, investment returns, private donations from retired executives. Today, he paused dramatically. It has reached $800,000. Gasps filled the ballroom. I stared at him. Even I hadn't known the final amount. Richard smiled. The agreement gave James one privilege. He alone would choose the very first recipient. Every camera turned toward me. Richard looked directly at Daniel. Daniel Brooks. Daniel looked completely frozen. Please join us on stage. He stood slowly. His knees visibly shook. When he reached us, Richard extended his hand. On behalf of Franklin Industrial Systems, we are honored to present you with the first Legacy Gratitude Award. $800,000. Daniel simply stared. His voice disappeared. I can't accept this. Richard smiled gently. You already have. Daniel looked at me. His eyes filled with tears. Why? I placed my hand on his shoulder. Because your father once saved my life. I smiled through my own tears. And because you've spent the last 20 years honoring his. The audience rose again. This time, the applause seemed endless. I had no idea that somewhere in Arizona, Ryan and Ashley had just seen every second of it on live television. I didn't leave the ballroom right away. After the applause finally faded, dozens of people surrounded Daniel and me. Employees I'd worked beside for years wanted photos. Retirees hugged me. Former supervisors, men who had once terrified me as a young mechanic, stood in line just to shake my hand one last time. I've never seen a ceremony like this, one woman from Human Resources said. Another employee laughed. I think half the audience cried. I smiled politely. I wasn't planning on any of that. I believe you, she replied. That's why everyone loved it. Daniel still looked completely overwhelmed. Every few minutes he'd whisper the same sentence. I still can't believe this. I finally pulled him aside. Listen to me. He looked at me with watery eyes. That money isn't a reward for one afternoon. What do you mean? It's recognition for the man you've spent 20 years becoming. He shook his head. I don't even know how to thank you. You already have. How? You showed up. He looked confused. I smiled. Sometimes that's the greatest gift anyone can give. About 20 minutes later, Richard walked over carrying 2 cups of coffee. He handed one to me. You okay? I think so, he laughed. I've known you a long time. Too long. You've been trying very hard not to think about your son? I sighed. Am I that obvious? Only to old friends. We stood quietly near one of the ballroom windows overlooking downtown Columbus. Finally, Richard asked, Do you want me to have our media department remove any mention of Ryan? I thought about it. The television broadcast had clearly shown the empty seat. People would ask questions. News reporters loved stories that wrote themselves. An elderly father, an absent son, a surprise inheritance. It was practically designed for social media. No, I finally answered. Are you sure? I don't want anyone attacking him. Richard nodded. But you also don't want us hiding the truth. Exactly. He placed a hand on my shoulder. You're a better father than most men would have been. I wasn't sure that was true. Good fathers don't always raise good sons. Sometimes, they simply keep loving them anyway. Daniel insisted on driving behind me to make sure I got home safely. He laughed when I protested. You've looked after me for 20 years. Let me return the favor for one afternoon. We drove north through afternoon traffic. When I reached my little ranch house, he parked behind me. We stood in the driveway talking for nearly half an hour. What are you going to do? I asked. About what? The money. He stared at the ground. I honestly haven't thought that far. I figured you'd already have a list. He smiled. My students. I wasn't surprised. Our robotics program barely survives every year. We lose kids because families can't afford equipment. He paused. I want every child who loves engineering to have a chance. Then he laughed. And maybe replace my 15-year-old pickup. I was wondering how long it'd take before you admitted that. He grinned. It's making some very concerning noises. You've earned a newer truck. No. He looked at me seriously. My father earned that. Those words hit me harder than I expected. Michael would have smiled hearing his son say them. After Daniel finally left, I walked inside my house. The silence felt familiar. I loosened my tie, hung my suit jacket in the closet, placed the Crystal Award carefully on the fireplace mantel beside Linda's photograph. I looked at her smiling face. You would have liked today. For a moment, I could almost hear her answering. Then my phone began vibrating across the kitchen table. Once, twice, again, again, again. I frowned. Unknown number. I ignored it. Another call. Ryan. I ignored that one too. Then Ashley. Then Ryan again. The phone wouldn't stop. Finally, I picked it up. The notification screen seemed endless. Missed call, voicemail, text message, another voicemail. When I finally reached the top, I counted them. 112 missed calls. I stared at the number. Then my phone rang again. Ryan. This time, I answered. Hi, son. His breathing sounded rushed, almost panicked. Dad. Yes. Why didn't you tell me? I looked around my quiet kitchen. Tell you what, the money? Oh, $800,000. Yes. You knew. I knew there would be a gift. You never told me. You never asked. Silence. Then, Dad, Ashley, and I are driving to the airport. I thought you were enjoying your vacation. We're leaving. No need. Dad, you've already spent money on flights. This isn't about the vacation. What is it about? He hesitated. He couldn't answer. Not immediately. Finally, he whispered, I should have been there. I closed my eyes. Yes. I made a mistake. You did. Another long silence. Then he asked quietly, Are you angry? I thought carefully before answering. No, you're not. I'm disappointed. There was a difference. A very big difference. Anger usually fades. Disappointment settles much deeper. Ashley suddenly grabbed the phone. James. Hello, Ashley. I think we've all gotten a little carried away. What do you mean? People online are making Ryan look like some terrible son. I haven't spoken to anyone online. I know, but that empty chair. What about it? It embarrassed us. I took a slow breath. No. What? It didn't embarrass you. She sounded confused. You embarrassed yourselves. Silence. Then she snapped. You could have warned us. I invited you. That's not what I mean. I know. Her voice became colder. People think Daniel deserves that money more than Ryan. I answered honestly. That's because Daniel was there. She made an irritated sound. So that's it? What? You replaced your own son? No. My voice remained calm. Ryan replaced himself. She had nothing left to say. She handed the phone back. Ryan spoke quietly. Dad? Yes. I'm coming over tonight. I'll be here. I love you. The words surprised me. He hadn't said them in months, maybe longer. I love you too. Then the call ended. Within hours, clips from the ceremony spread everywhere. Local television stations replayed the announcement. National websites picked up the story. Comment sections exploded. Many praised Daniel. Many admired the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Others focused on the empty chair. Complete strangers shared stories about parents who had sacrificed everything only to be forgotten by their children. Reading those comments made me uncomfortable. People only knew one afternoon. They didn't know my son. Not really. Ryan wasn't evil. He wasn't cruel. He wasn't greedy by nature. He had simply spent too many years believing there would always be another chance. Another birthday, another dinner, another phone call, another ceremony, another tomorrow. Life has a painful way of proving otherwise. As darkness settled outside my windows, headlights finally turned into my driveway. Ryan had come home, but he wasn't alone. Ashley stepped out of the passenger seat beside him, and judging by the look on her face, this conversation was about to become much more complicated than I had imagined. I watched Ryan climb out of the SUV with his shoulders slumped, looking older than he had just that morning. Ashley climbed out after him, but unlike Ryan, she wasn't carrying regret. She was carrying anger. Ryan stood quietly at the edge of my driveway. Ashley marched straight toward the front porch. James, she called before I even opened the screen door. We need to talk. I unlocked the door. You'd better come in. Neither of them spoke as they entered the house. Ashley looked around my living room as though she'd never really seen it before. The same worn leather recliner, the same brick fireplace. Linda's favorite quilt folded neatly over the couch, the family photographs covering one wall. Ryan stared at those pictures for a long moment. There he was at 6 years old, proudly holding his first baseball trophy. There he was at 16 after getting his driver's license. There we were together on his college graduation day. His mother stood between us, smiling so brightly it still hurt to look at. Ryan swallowed hard. I haven't been here in a while. No, I answered softly. You haven't. Silence settled over the room. Finally, Ashley broke it. I'll just say what we're both thinking. Ryan looked at her. Ashley, no. She crossed her arms. $800,000. You knew Daniel for years. You could have at least mentioned something. I poured 3 glasses of iced tea and placed them on the coffee table. No one touched theirs. I didn't know the amount. You knew there was money. I knew there would be a gift. She leaned forward. And you chose someone else's son. I met her eyes. I chose someone who showed up. Ryan closed his eyes. Dad. Ashley turned toward him. Don't just sit there. He should have told us. Ryan looked exhausted. Ashley. He embarrassed us in front of the entire country. No. Ryan shook his head slowly. We embarrassed ourselves. She stared at him. What? He invited us. We said no. Her face hardened. So you're taking his side now. I'm taking the truth. The room fell quiet. For the first time since she'd walked inside, Ashley had no immediate response. Ryan finally looked at me. I owe you an apology. I nodded. You do. I'm sorry. I believe you. He looked surprised. You do. I believe you're sorry. I paused. I just don't know what you're sorry about. He frowned. What do you mean? Are you sorry because you hurt me? Or because everyone else saw it happen? He didn't answer. Not because he was stubborn, because he honestly didn't know. I stood and walked down the hallway toward the spare bedroom. When I came back, I carried 3 old storage boxes. Ryan recognized them immediately. I haven't seen those since Mom. His voice faded. I placed the boxes on the coffee table. Open them. He slowly lifted the lid off the first one. Inside were folders, receipts, old envelopes, handwritten notes. What is all this? Our life. He picked up a faded tuition statement from Ohio State. Across the top was his name. The balance had been marked, paid in full. Another envelope held canceled checks, one after another, semester after semester, books, housing, meal plans. Ryan looked confused. I thought scholarships covered most of this. They covered some. I never knew. You weren't supposed to. He reached deeper into the box. There were mortgage documents, the down payment for his first house, the loan I'd quietly co-signed before removing my name 2 years later. There were invoices from his wedding, the photographer, the florist, the reception hall. Ryan stared at one receipt. His eyes widened. Dad, you paid for this. I helped. I thought Grandpa. No. He looked up at me. You never said anything. What would have been the point? Parents don't raise children to collect thank you notes. We raise them because that's what parents do. Ryan opened the second box. Inside sat dozens of photographs. Some were faded around the edges. One showed Linda sewing patches onto his Little League uniform after working a 10-hour nursing shift. Another showed me replacing our own aging roof, because paying a contractor would have meant postponing Ryan's college savings. There were camping trips instead of expensive vacations, birthday cakes baked at home instead of ordered from fancy bakeries. Not because we couldn't occasionally spend more, because every extra dollar had a destination, Ryan's future. Ryan picked up a photograph of Linda standing beside our old station wagon. I remember this car. It had almost 200,000 miles. You kept saying you liked it? I smiled. I hated it. He laughed through tears. Then why didn't you buy another one? Because the transmission replacement cost less than your freshman textbooks. His shoulders began shaking. He looked down at the photograph for a long time. I never knew. I know. The third box contained something different. Letters. Dozens of them. Every birthday card Linda had ever written to Ryan before she died. Every Christmas note. Every handwritten message she'd tucked into his lunchbox during elementary school. Ryan carefully unfolded one. Her familiar handwriting filled the page. No matter how old you become, always remember that time is the most valuable gift you can give someone you love. His tears finally came. Real tears. Not embarrassment, not panic, grief, regret. He covered his face with both hands. I've become the man Mom warned me not to be. No one spoke. The silence said enough. A soft knock interrupted the moment. I opened the front door. Daniel stood there holding a small cardboard box. I'm sorry, he said quietly. I didn't know you had company. It's all right. Ryan stood. Daniel immediately looked uncomfortable. I can come back another time. No, Ryan said. Please stay. Daniel stepped inside. He placed the box on my kitchen counter. I brought dinner. I laughed. You didn't have to. I figured after today nobody remembered to eat. That sounded exactly like his father. Ryan watched the exchange. He noticed something I don't think he'd ever noticed before. Daniel knew where I kept the plates. He knew which cabinet held the glasses. He even knew the coffee maker still stuck unless you pushed the switch twice. Not because he lived there, because he'd been visiting, helping, showing up, quietly, for years, while my own son had been too busy. Ryan looked at Daniel. How often do you come by? Daniel hesitated. I don't know. Every couple of weeks, I answered for him. Sometimes more. Ryan nodded slowly. You've been taking care of my dad. Daniel looked embarrassed. He took care of me first. Ashley suddenly stood. This is unbelievable. All three of us turned toward her. So now everyone gets to act like Ryan is some terrible son. No one answered. She grabbed her purse. I'm not sitting here listening to this guilt trip. Ryan looked at her. You should go. She blinked. What? You heard me. Ryan, I need to stay. For him, for me. She stared at him for several long seconds before storming out the front door. The slam echoed through the house. Ryan didn't follow. Instead, he slowly turned back toward me. For the first time in years, he wasn't looking at me like an obligation. He was looking at me like his father. After Ashley left, the house felt strangely peaceful. No one rushed to fill the silence. Ryan sat at the kitchen table with his elbows resting on his knees, staring at the wooden floor. Daniel quietly unpacked the dinner he'd brought. Homemade chicken noodle soup, fresh bread from the bakery a few blocks away, apple pie, the kind Linda used to bake every fall. I hope you don't mind, Daniel said. I figured today was too important for fast food. I smiled. Your timing couldn't have been better. We sat down together. Three men. Three very different stories. For the first few minutes, nobody talked much. Sometimes people imagine reconciliation happens because someone gives a perfect speech. Life doesn't usually work that way. More often, healing begins over something as ordinary as sharing a meal. Ryan finally broke the silence. I honestly don't remember the last time we had dinner together. I looked at him. It was Thanksgiving. He frowned. No, 3 years ago. His face fell. I thought it had only been a year. I nodded gently. Time moves faster than we realize. That sentence lingered over the table longer than anything else we'd said. The following week felt different. Ryan called every morning, not to ask for anything, not to explain himself, simply to ask, "How are you today, Dad?" At first I wondered whether guilt was talking. But guilt usually gets tired. Consistency doesn't. Monday became Tuesday. Tuesday became Friday. The calls continued. One afternoon, he stopped by carrying 2 fishing rods. I found these in my garage. I recognized them immediately. One belonged to him, the other belonged to me. I thought maybe, he hesitated, if you're free Saturday. I smiled. I've been free for years. His eyes watered. I know. That Saturday, we drove to the same little lake where I'd taught him to fish when he was 8 years old. The old wooden dock still leaned slightly to one side. The paint had faded. The benches had been replaced. Everything else felt familiar. Ryan cast his line into the water. I forgot how quiet this place is. That's why I like it. He looked out across the lake. I used to think success meant having the biggest house, the nicest vacations, the newest car. He laughed softly. I spent so much time chasing things that I forgot to make time for people. I didn't interrupt. He needed to hear himself say it. My whole life you've shown up. He looked at me, and I stopped showing up for you. I nodded. Yes, I'm ashamed of that. I know. You aren't making this easy. No, I smiled gently. Forgiveness isn't difficult. Trust is. He accepted that without arguing. That alone told me he was changing. Meanwhile, Daniel's life had transformed overnight. News stations continued sharing the story of the Legacy Gratitude Fund. Parents wrote letters thanking him for becoming a teacher. Former students posted messages online describing how he'd inspired them to study engineering. Instead of disappearing from public attention, Daniel used it for something meaningful. He announced that nearly half of the award would establish scholarships for students interested in robotics, engineering, and skilled trades. I wouldn't be standing here, he told reporters during one interview, if someone hadn't believed in me long before I believed in myself. He never mentioned my name unless someone asked. That was typical Daniel. He always redirected praise toward someone else. A month later, he invited Ryan and me to visit his classroom. Teenagers crowded around unfinished robots, computer screens, and tool benches. One young girl walked up shyly. Mr. Brooks says you're the reason we got new equipment. I laughed. No. I pointed toward Daniel. He's the reason. She smiled. He says you taught him generosity. Daniel overheard her. He looked at me across the classroom. Neither of us said anything. We didn't have to. Michael would have understood. Ryan started coming to the house every Sunday. Sometimes we watched football. Sometimes we worked in the yard. Sometimes we simply drank coffee on the back porch. He never acted as though one apology had erased years of distance. Instead, he did something much harder. He kept showing up. One afternoon, he brought over a small toolbox. "What are we fixing?" I asked. "The fence." "It isn't broken," he smiled. "I know. I just wanted an excuse to spend the day with you." I laughed harder than I had in months. "You finally sound like my son again." Ashley never came back. She and Ryan separated quietly a few weeks later. There was no dramatic courtroom battle, no screaming matches, no revenge. Just two people realizing they wanted different lives. One evening, Ryan admitted something. "I don't blame Ashley." I looked at him. "I made my own choices. I kept choosing convenience. I kept assuming you'd always understand." He shook his head. "I confused your patience with permission." That may have been the wisest thing he'd ever said. Several months after the ceremony, Franklin Industrial Systems invited me back for the dedication of the Legacy Gratitude Mentorship Program. The company had decided to expand the original fund into an annual program pairing experienced employees with young people entering skilled trades and engineering careers. Richard smiled as he welcomed everyone. This all began because one man believed character should outlive a paycheck. This time, when I walked into the auditorium, the front row seat beside mine wasn't empty. Ryan was already sitting there. He stood as soon as he saw me. "I wanted to make sure I got here early." "You certainly did." "I wasn't going to miss this one." He smiled sheepishly. "Not for anything." Daniel sat on my other side. I looked at the two young men beside me, one connected by blood, the other connected by a promise. I realized something then. Family isn't weakened by gratitude, it's strengthened by it. The ceremony itself wasn't nearly as emotional as the first one. There were no surprise gifts, no television cameras focused on an empty chair, no shocking announcements, just dozens of young apprentices meeting mentors who genuinely cared about their future. And honestly, that mattered far more than headlines ever could. As we walked toward the parking lot afterward, Ryan stopped beside my truck. "Dad." "Yes. Thank you." "For what?" "For loving me. Even when I made it hard." I placed a hand on his shoulder. "Being your father was never the hard part." "What was?" "Waiting for you to find your way home." He wrapped his arms around me. The kind of hug that lasts long enough to say everything words cannot. For the first time in years, I felt my family becoming whole again. Not because money had changed anyone. Money hadn't repaired a single relationship. Choices had, time had, humility had, and love, the quiet, stubborn kind that refuses to disappear, had finally been met with gratitude. If this story reminded you of someone who sacrificed quietly for your family, don't wait for a special occasion to tell them what they mean to you. Time is the one gift none of us can earn back. And if this journey touched your heart, I'd be honored if you shared it with someone who needs the reminder, and subscribe for more stories about family second chances and the strength it takes to choose love over pride.